leave some on the table here to the right. Good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's session entitled Native Utahns, the Struggle to Get and Use Water from the Settlement Era to the Present. My name is Brad Westwood. I'm Senior Public Historian, one of a few public historians that we have here in Utah. I work for the Utah Department of Culture and Community Engagement, and I am the producer of the podcast Speak Your Piece, a podcast about Utah's history. As we begin, we want to offer a land acknowledgement that this valley and the vast surrounding mountains were inhabited and considered sacred to the Ute people and their ancestors. As a rich valley of water, fish, and wildlife, it was also periodically lands used by the Goshute, Paiute, and Shoshone. It has been the Ute stewardship for time immemorial to care for this land and all its inhabitants. We honor their memory and the physical presence they have remaining in this valley. Okay, yes. Let me introduce the session speakers in order in which they'll be presenting. Cheryl Lombert is a member of the Ute Indian tribe. She is an advocate for her tribe, their culture, and their history and their life ways. Cheryl is a former Ute tribal librarian and now serves on the Utah State Historical Records Advisory Board, also known as USHRAB, which mission is to assist the public and private nonprofit organizations throughout Utah in their effort to acquire, preserve, and share the records of enduring value to Utah. Our second speaker is Sandra Jones, who has a PhD in history from the University of Utah in American and Native American history. Sondra is an adjunct professor at Brigham Young University in the history department, and she is the author of Being and Becoming Ute, the story of the American Indian people, published in 2018 by the University of Utah Press. Sondra's book traces the metamorphoses of Ute people from society of small interrelated bands of mobile hunter-gatherers to today's sovereign nation. Our third speaker is Dustin Jensen, who is the director of the Utah Division of Indian Affairs. He is originally from Coyote Canyon, New Mexico. He was born and raised on the Navajo Reservation and is an enrolled member there. Dustin attended school at Utah Valley University, Brigham Young University, and he holds a Juris Doctorate from the University of Utah, S.J. Quinney College of Law. Dustin practiced as an attorney and a judge. Since 2015 to the present, he has served as the program coordinator of the American Indian Studies program at Utah Valley University. Finally, making comments regarding these presentations, we will hear from James Toledo, also Dene Navajo, also from New Mexico. He is a program manager for the Utah Division of Indian Affairs and was the co-project leader for the May 2022 gathering in Ogden entitled Railroads in Native America, a gathering of Native American voices and perspectives about Utah history. First, Cheryl Lombert.
If you haven't already gotten a little cup of water, I've seen some that were a little late. There's some cups up here, so make sure you have those. If not, your little bigger cup of water will do. So Mike Nunania Nachdaka. I just want to welcome everyone today. I just said hello. My name is little girl in Ute. And Nunania, Cheryl Lombear. That means my name is Cheryl Lombear. I do speak my language. I do understand my language, but today I'm going to make sure that I speak English only for your comfort. So I am a member of the Native American Church. My great grandfather was the one that brought peyoteism to this tribe in the state, as well as Arizona, New Mexico. He did travel to Oklahoma, lots of different places that he decided to help teach with. There are 3 people that began the journey of teaching about peyoteism. And Quanah Parker was one of them, which is well known. There is a book written about him. It's called Peyote Religion by Omar C. Stewart. So if you have any questions, there are some information out there for him. He did travel with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show for a lot of years. I've been to Denver, Colorado to speak as well. I am also a Ute Indian tribe member and a Oglala Lakota descendant from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. So you have to excuse me a little bit, I'm a little nervous. But in our culture, they asked me, well, let me rewind that. They asked me to speak today about water. What I said was, I have no clue. Water is everywhere. Water is everything. Water is always a conversation that is always in the air, no matter where we are. Seeing it from a Native perspective here within the state, we are actually doing a lot of legal, what would you call it? Legal presentations, legal fights as well with the state of Utah. So I don't want to touch on that part. I want to touch on something that means more important things for the home and how we live our life. I want to introduce you to our cultural way and how we respect water, what it means to us, and how we treat that. Before beginning and getting into everything, we always practice our culture by making sure that we pray and belonging to the Native American Church, and as well as being from the Latter-day Saints. I am also LDS. I do know about prayer. You all know about prayer. We all pray together, right? So that's a universal for us. And this is going to be how we pray. So that way we give our blessings for the conference as well as our session and as well as for everyone that's in here. So we could take a moment. I'm going to ask Dustin to pray for us. It's always the male elder that prays in our culture. So.
Our Father and Creator, we come before you today to talk about these things, to talk about water, to talk about this earth, to talk about how we can help one another and come closer together with better understandings of each other and the knowledge that's out there. We ask that you would bless us with your Spirit to open our minds, to open our hearts, to help us hear these words that are being shared and to take them home with us, to take them back to work, to implement them, to be better people, to be better friends with this earth and this vegetation, the animals here, and the water that is provided. And we ask that you would watch over our families, where we're from, watch over our children, our grandchildren, watch over our parents and grandparents. Keep them safe in all that they do. And I pray for these things, and I do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So if you notice, they gave everyone a little cup. This is the way I can introduce how much that water means to us, to everyone. If you take your little cup, with the way we pray and the way we also give thanks for water in our lives, is we take a little bit in our hand, just a really tiny bit, and we rub our hands together and we bless ourselves from the head to the toe. your arms. And that means we are being blessed by the Mother Earth and what the water will give us, which is moisture in our daily lives. So you've experienced part of my culture. That's the closest way I could represent how we live, what we do, and how we operate. So when Brad called me, and he loves this, I was actually in the mountains at in the Uinta Mountains when they decided to ask me to do this. So I've been a bead worker ever since I was 5, and that was 40 years ago. And so I teach as well on our reservation. And it's really hard because our students and our kids are losing our culture. They're losing their identity. So the meaning of the water is, something that we bring up a lot with beading. That way we represent our history as well as our present. So there is modern things to use, and there's also historical. I teach both ways. So anyway, so just to add to everything the knowledge that I have, but yeah, if you can see this photo here is actually before the Mormons came, pioneers were here. These are photos from before 1847, which I heard in the luncheon. But Brad did touch on the Uinta Mountains. So this is actually near my home, which is lower than the Uinta Mountains. The Uinta Mountains we go up there every year, me and my family from South Dakota. And we make sure that we are harvesting teepee poles for the Native American church. And then my uncle is Sandor Iron Rope. He is from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and he is also the former president of the Native American Church. And he's also the president of the Native American Church of South Dakota. So there's a lot of information there. I did grow up in the Peyote Way. On the right is my great grandpa. So yeah, you're right. So that is my great grandpa, Sam Lomberg. And that next to him is Quanah Parker. So those are part of their photos of their travel that they did together. And then also, I believe that is in the Denver Museum. So I am a walking piece of history, so I've been told. But quite literally. But anyway, we harvest teepee poles. We meet always for my birthday every year. They celebrate by singing peyote songs, and then we cook naturally. We make sure that we camp by the spring, so that way we are we have easy access to water. So that being said, when we live on our reservation on a normal basis, water isn't easily accessible. So Leanne knows that, or Elena knows that. I mean, there's a few of us that are from Vernal. We know how hard it is. Our reservation used to be 550,000 acres. So I want you all to imagine getting a house. How many of you do own a house? So let's just say you remember the time that you signed the contract for your house, right? Right? I'm gonna buy this house. You should probably still making payments. I'm not really sure. I'm not in anybody's business. But you sign that contract. So say you sign that contract. Right? Done deal. I got my keys to my house, right? Now let's just say I tell you that you only get 1/4 of it. That is what the United States has done to our reservation. Now, I'm not here to be mad. I'm not here to talk bad. It's in a good way, but we went from 550,000 to 330,000. That includes most of the northeastern part of Utah. So that's a pretty big chunk out of our land, which included some water rights. So at home, we have farmers. At home, we have recreation. At home, we have, different utilities on our reservation, as well as the own Ute Indian tribe stuff. Recreation area, we have recreation area, we have a fish hatchery, different things that we have that are available for our tribe. But yet when the state comes along and says, which is why we developed U-Pack, and says, well, you guys aren't using it, so we're gonna take it. And that's basically what has happened. Now, we were here before Mormons. You heard in the luncheon 1847, which is why I commented to Brad, that's pretty interesting, because our treaty was signed in 1846. So now all our tribe is trying to tell everyone is, what about our rights? We followed the rules, we followed the procedures, we followed, everything that you guys have, the state, not you guys, the state, what the state has asked of us, we've done. And we've done it peacefully. We have been a peaceful tribe. We're not ones to attack, so to speak. In history, we have never been. This has always been our people and what we've done for our tribe. So next picture. Uncle Pogri, that is what I am. We have 3 different bands. There's Uwina, White River, and Uncle Pogri. I am Uncle Pogri, which means Uncle Pogri, we came from, we do live here on the reservation due to the treaty here in the state, but our families and our ancestors also came from Southern Colorado, and we were herded up here like cattle by gunpoint. We didn't ride horses, we walked the whole way. Some died, we lost over 100 people on the travel. So only certain people had to be moved up here. Green River or a agency, that is right next to where my mom was born in 1946. Okay, so next picture. Here's a map of our reservation in the late 1800s. This was before they decided to narrow it down to 330,000 acres. So as you can see, it took up a lot more space than what it is today. What it is today is a little tiny blob like that compared to all of that area. Okay. Next picture, please. This is all my relatives. This is what we celebrate yearly on our reservation. It is called the Bear Dance, and we celebrate because it's spring. It's our spring celebration. We are grateful and thankful for the water and the rain that does come our way to fill up Green River, to fill up Flaming Gorge, all of those areas that we have on the reservation. When we get together, this was a first for our tribe. This photo, when we get together, they're mainly just in like clothing like I have on today, which is called a ribbon skirt. So we asked our elders and also our warriors to come into our what do you call it, arena, to celebrate with us that year before they're gone. Okay, so we utilize our celebrations as well to be appreciative and humble of what Mother Nature gives us, regardless of containment, regardless of need, want. We are appreciative of what we do have, not what we don't have. Okay, next picture. Defend the sacred. This has been a big issue. If you guys had any knowledge or recollection of what happened in Turtle Mountain and the Keystone Pipeline, this is them. I'm actually way back there. Way back there on the hill. We went to make sure that we, helped contribute as much as we could for them. clothing, blankets, whatever we could. But they were fighting for their water. They were fighting for their rights. They fought for them to be heard. And this is as far as, they got, because they ended up putting the pipeline in anyway. So it's a difficult travel between our past and our present. So this is something that has relative to do with our present. Next picture. And that's pretty much all I have. So any questions or anybody want to hit me up? I really had a hard time struggling with this, because let me tell you guys, there is so many things going on our reservation with our tribe, Ute Indian tribe. We don't face just water rights issues. We also face jurisdictional issues, which is on each side of us. We have counties on each side. So we do face those issues with who's in the right, who's in the wrong, what our land base is, because when they did cut it down, they cut it into a checkerboard. And from there, we have a very difficult time saying, hey, wait a minute, this is our land. And then they come along and say, no, this is state land. This is for national forest land. So we have a difficult time trying to explain those things to the public as well. Anything else I can answer?
Termination of the Keystone Pipeline for the waters.
It didn't, because they picked it back up. And they went ahead and built it anyway. So all it did for Turtle Mountain was basically keep the little pond that they were fighting over. And it was extremely sad, because we spent like 9 months up there, all of us taking things up and coming back down. And yeah, and from what I read after the whole thing was, they went around the pond, the Turtle Mountain, and that was it. So they still went ahead with the pipeline, but it's just right on the other side of it. So if it were to spill, if something were to crack, it would still go into the water. Anything else?
Thank you, Cheryl.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, there's one there. Our next speaker is Dr. Sandra Jones.
Oh, that looks like the one I carry in my briefcase. I must be nervous. My mouth is dry. I'm a water bottle carrier. Can you hear me? Okay. Just as a quick caveat, my husband is an unaffiliated Native American and Hispanic, probably a little white guy in there somewhere in the woodpile. So I'm not Native American, but all of my kids claim their Native American heritage, just as my husband. So I'm surrounded. Wanted to talk about the battles that the tribe out here in the Uinta Basin has fought over water rights and how they're affected by water. And I may ask you to speak Ute, and I only have lots of grammars and dictionaries to go by to pronounce the word water.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have done that. It is Nu-Pah. Well, it's
Ute water, I mean just water.
Pah.
Pa, okay,
Not pah.
pa,
Like put P in the B.
okay. So when I mispronounce it, you know what it's supposed to be. To begin with, for hundreds of years, the indigenous people of Utah and Western Colorado, I'm going to read because I get sidetracked, so I'm just going to read so I get through. The indigenous people of Utah and Western Colorado were identified with the rivers, the streams, the lakes, the wetlands that anchored their individual band territories and their subsistence patterns. The closeness was often reflected in their names because most of these Nu-Pah people were identified by where they ranged or what they ate. And that was typically linked with the life-giving and wildlife-rich rivers, streams, marshes, and lakes near which they hunted and where they camped. For example, the Ute word for water is, and not surprisingly, the bands that subsisted near those lakes and near the marshes had names that reflected that. For example, the Timpanogos Utes. They were named for the lake by that same name that was their favorite campsite. They were also known as Laguna or lake people, sometimes referred to as water edge people or fish eaters, all water oriented. They depended on the rivers and the marshes that fed the Lake Timpanogos. Government records often chose to identify Utes in Colorado and Utah based on where they could be found, often by agencies near their hunting and camping grounds, typically associated with rivers. Consequently, government records will list the Pogri, or red water sitting Utes, or the white, or the grand, or the Los Pinos River Utes. The Yampa or Yamparica Utes, and earlier the Yamparica Comanche, ranged along the river bottoms of the Yampa River because they were thick with the tasty Yampa root, which I think probably means a water-based or water-influenced root. Other Nu-Pah people in Utah included the Pahvants, who ranged around the Sevier Lake with its marshes and river, and the Southern Paiute, who roamed near several Utah rivers and springs in the south. Ethnohistorians have long described how vital the water-based resources were. Although the Nu-Pah people of Utah hunted small game and some large game in the fall to supplement their plant-based diet, most of the Western Ute protein was based on the abundant fish that were found in the streams and lakes, as well as the waterfowl and small animals that thrived in the associated wetlands. The marshes also provided rich nurseries in which the fingerlings and the fry survived and thrived. Early Utah Valley settlers described the spring spawning season when fish swarmed upstream in such abundance that the rivers were full, quote, from bank to bank, as thick as they could swim for hours and sometimes days together, and fish would be taken from morning until night, end quote, literally by hand if you wanted to. Early Utah Valley settlers described bands of Utes from hundreds of miles around would join the Timpanogos Utes for an annual fish festival near the Utah Valley Lake Timpanogos. During this time, fish were caught, dried, and prepared for winter storage. At other times, these fish eater Utes might use nets or artificial shallows or constructed bulrush rafts from which they speared or line fished or shot fish with barbed fish arrows. They also ice fished during the winter on Utah Lake. Then the settlers arrived, and this will change. These new agriculturalists systematically, if inadvertently, destroyed the water-based resources that had made the marsh-filled valleys so attractive to the indigenous people. Dr. Smoke described this quite adequately just earlier. These settlers dammed the rivers and diverted the water to irrigate fields. With rivers intermittently starved of water, the spawning fish were blocked and fish populations declined rapidly. Marshes were drained in order to reclaim land to farm. So fingerlings died and waterfowl grew scarce. Overfishing by settlers during a couple of starving times in Utah decimated fish populations. And early attempts at catfish farming in Utah Lake resulted in this invasive species proliferating and taking over the shallows. This stirred up the mud, which was ecologically devastating to the native fish. 10 Utah-specific fish species will go extinct, and 2 more, including the June sucker, became endangered. By the end of the 1860s, most Western Utes had been relocated to the arid Uinta Basin, where these water-anchored people struggled to survive on a reservation with sparse rivers and inadequate agency supplies. In 1879, Utes from the White River Agency, which included the merged White River, Grand River, and Yampa River Utes, were relocated to the Uinta region, followed soon after by the Pogri, who were given even more arid land to the south. Meanwhile, Utah settlement continued apace, often impinging illegally on Ute reserved land. Heber Valley residents had begun grazing their cattle in the lush Strawberry River Valley by 1870, and they were diverting much of its water for irrigation in the Heber Valley. By the early 1900s, a rising national enthusiasm for reclamation projects led to the proposal to reclaim water in the Uinta Basin. These ideas got caught up in state and federal politics, as well as in growing anticipation that that 4 million acre Ute reservation, Uinta and Ouray combined, would soon be opened up to non-Indian homesteading. Meanwhile, Spanish Fork residents in South Utah Valley also hit upon the idea of storing and diverting Strawberry River water to Utah Valley. By 1902, enthusiastic plans were underway to create a reservoir on the Strawberry River. Strawberry Valley Reclamation Service promptly approached the tribe and offered to buy the land at the going rate of $1.25 per acre for 56,000 acres. But the tribe flatly refused. The money they were receiving at that time for leased grazing rights in the valley remained important as a source of income. And the tribe was making plans to use the valley for their own stock raising enterprises. Government officials also voiced concern over diverting water that they would soon need for individual Ute homesteads in the near future. They were planning to divide up the reservation and allot individual homesteads to families. But a growing population of farmers, ranchers, miners, industrialists, all along the Wasatch Front, they needed water. They also had the ear of the powerful politicians who could back their reclamation plans, and various bills were then introduced into the state legislature. In 1905, the Utes were allotted those individual homesteads. However, there's a convenient loophole in the Allotment Act that specified when allotments were made, land had to be reserved to conserve a water supply for Indian or general agricultural use. Consequently, as soon as the allotments were authorized in 1905, the land in the Strawberry Valley was targeted for conservation. Then it was assigned for irrigation works, as it was allowed to do in the 1902 Reclamation Act. In 1911, a legislative bill completed the divestiture. The Ute title to the land was extinguished, essentially by eminent domain. The Reclamation Service paid the tribe the original offer of $1.25 per acre, $71,000. Then they took possession of the valley. The Strawberry Valley project became Utah's first reclamation project. As expected, after the allotments were completed in 1905, the remaining land was opened up for non-Indian homestead. Over the next few years, nearly 1 million acres of the best land will be sold to the new farmers. However, 60,000 acres will be reserved in the basin to be used for tribal water projects to facilitate irrigation. Immediately after allotments, and despite tribal objections, Congress will pass provisions to begin work on a new project, the Uinta Indian Irrigation Project. But the tribe objected because few Utes had any intention of farming. That was just not part of their culture. They were not a farming people. As they saw no reason to build a system of irrigation canals that could only benefit non-Indians in the end, why would they want to do it? They went ahead and built it, and it did benefit the non-Indians. The project was constructed, providing a system of 22 canals that would divert water from most of the Uinta Basin streams, make irrigation water available to 80,000 acres of land that was allotted to Utes. Additionally, and also at tribal expense, the government planned to clear, fence, and plow all those homesteads. In addition to the tribal debt that this incurred, individual non-farming Utes faced another problem. Once the project was completed, they had to be individually assessed for the water rights, you had to pay for water rights, and for the improvements, whether or not they wanted or used them. And according to state law, if water designated for irrigation, which this was not used for irrigation, after 5 years, it reverted to public domain. And then it was subject to new claims. And indeed, over time, more than a third of the water rights were lost. Some water rights were leased to non-Indian farmers, often as a means of preserving the rights, but ultimately much of the land and its water rights was sold. Consequently, because of issues over this unwanted irrigation water, the tribe lost nearly 30,000 acres of Ute land to non-Indians. 50 years later, new fights over water will erupt, this time over tribal water rights within the 1928 Colorado River Compact. This compact had apportioned water from the Colorado from among 7 states. In 1948, the 5 upriver states signed into a Upper Colorado River Basin project, and they soon developed a series of major new projects of their own known as the Colorado River Storage Project, or CRISP. These projects were delayed until 1956 by funding issues, and then growing controversy over rising costs, environmental concerns as well. As part of CRISP, the Central Utah Water Conservancy District developed the Central Utah Project, or CUP, which included a Bonneville unit. This project, Bonneville, envisioned building dams and diverting water from the Uinta Basin, where the Utes now resided, to the heavily populated and industrialized Wasatch Front, using a series of dams and tunnels. However, unlike the 1905 Strawberry Project, Utah had to address the question of tribal water rights because of the 1908 Supreme Court decision known as the Winters Doctrine. In the 1908 decision, the court recognized that Native Americans had prior rights to water on their reservations that dated back to the establishment of their reservation. For the Uinta and Ouray Utes, this was 1861. The doctrine of prior rights had long ruled access to water in the West where water was scarce. This meant that whoever first took the water and put it to beneficial use had right to that water. This will mostly change throughout the country after the government began to develop community use dams, reservoirs, and delivery systems. It also shifted after the landmark Supreme Court decision in 1908 that established that winter doctrine. So in 1965, CUP consulted the Uinta and Ouray tribes, and they negotiated an agreement that promised future water projects for the tribe in exchange for 60,000 acre feet per year of water. The first projects were begun and some water was diverted to the metro area. But during the Korean and especially the Vietnam War, construction slowed because of funding constraints. And then over the next dozen years, the country grew increasingly disenchanted with large, expensive water projects. And then the environmentalists began to warn about endangered species, that some dam sites were unstable. And in 1978, Jimmy Carter put the Central Utah Project on his funding hit list. So CUP tried a new tactic. They linked their needs to the treated tribal water rights, thereby, quote, wrapping their project in an Indian blanket, unquote. But then negotiations over the Uinta Basin projects ran into more difficulties, this time with the tribe itself. At issue were questions of tribal jurisdiction that is control of the water, and again, how much money the tribe could be paid for their water. Hoping to avoid political and legal entanglements, in 1989, a Utah congressman proposed the federal government simply pay the tribe. Pay them $514 million to settle state and federal obligations for the water that was diverted for non-Indian use. Governor Bangerter signed the pact that guaranteed the tribe 498,000 acre feet and certified tribal jurisdiction over existing water within the limits of Utah water law. But internal tribal politics flared. Dissident candidates threatened to deep six the entire compact, a campaign promise they will ultimately keep. Citing the Winters Doctrine, the newly elected tribal officials will now argue that subjecting themselves to Utah water laws eroded tribal self-determination and sovereignty. Then they threatened to just withhold CUP water entirely if they were not paid an immediate $100 million, plus the right to lease future water at fair market value, including to downstream users. They insisted they had the right to exercise jurisdiction and control of all of their water, even after it left the reservation. But the state remained adamant. They insisted that any agreement with the tribe had to be treated in exactly the same way as any other water user in the state. Finally, tired of the bickering, Congress reauthorized the Central Utah Project in 1992 without any further negotiation with the tribe. Within 3 years, the Jordanelle Dam had been completed along with several other projects in the Uinta Basin. As part of the reauthorization, Congress implemented a new settlement that included annual payments for the tribal development and water storage projects, and they detailed how the tribe would be paid. The tribe would receive a series of cash payments to reimburse them for the default on the old 1965 agreement. For the first 50 years, they would be paid $1,940,000 a year to compensate the tribe for water the state was already diverting over to the Wasatch Front for industrial and municipal uses. Thereafter, the tribe would receive a percentage of fair market value for that 35,500 acre feet. The tribe would also receive $45 million in 3 installments for farm-related projects and another $28.5 million for specific projects in water storage and stream and habitat improvement. But of course, the money came with strings attached. The $125 million could only be used for economic development. It could not be dispersed to individual tribal members at the tribal committee's choice. And to receive the development money, the tribe had to produce an approved tribal development plan. Once the money had been distributed to the tribe could no longer claim or litigate over any abandoned water projects that had previously been proposed. The final settlement would total $295.5 million over 50 years, with $198.5 million of it to be paid by 2005. Within a year, the first of the so-called Bonneville credits had been deposited into the tribe's bank account. But the tribe protested. Members of the tribe, many of them remembered the 1989 proposed $514 million. They believed they'd been cheated out of $200 million. Many also believed their sovereignty was being curtailed by being forced to yield tribal control and waive litigation rights. Again, water agreement became a heated political issue. And at first, tribal leaders refused to even touch the settlement money lest they tacitly ratify the agreement and then be accused by members of selling out the tribe. That only lasted 2.5 years until, desperate for money, the tribal leaders called a last-minute referendum. A minority of members ratified the compact so the tribe could start spending the water money. This did not stop the controversy, though. As the state moved ahead on the Uinta Basin Replacement Project, tribal opposition to the projects on the reservation snarled planning again. The tribe specifically attacked two particular water storage projects that had been proposed that would store water, provide recreation, and enhance the environment, i.e. look pretty. The projects allocated water for the irrigation of both tribal and non-tribal members, as well as municipal water for Roosevelt. Tribal leaders began to question whether or not there was an actual value in the projects for the tribe. At the same time, vocal non-Indian environmentalists began to protest that damming the Uinta River and the Yellowstone Creek would close off these last free-flowing streams on the south slopes of the Uintas, and that should be protected, along with 4 endangered fish species in the lower Duchesne River. There were competing demands for the water. Secondary users, mostly non-Indian farmers, wanted water to irrigate their crops. The tribe wanted just enough water to attract tourists, and they continued to argue about who controlled the water. Ultimately, the tribe abruptly nixed the water projects on tribal trust land. CUP had to make alternative plans for storage and delivery systems. Since 1998, the Bonneville unit has provided projects to mitigate fish and wildlife losses in the reservation land as a result of water projects on the Uinta Basin. Bottle Hollow Reservoir was constructed to compensate for loss of some stream fishing and to provide opportunities for recreation and tourism. In conjunction with the tribe, plans were also made to restore and enhance wetlands, riparian habitats, both of them along the lower Duchesne River, as well as to mitigate the impact on wetlands and wildlife on the strawberry storage and delivery system. Meanwhile, by the 21st century, the tribe was using their water payments to promote tribal economic, social, and educational development. This has included direct investment in tribally owned oil and gas companies, as well as a variety of commercial ventures, technology services, tourism, feedlots, and managing tribal resources, including fish and wildlife. Today, while the Utes are no longer directly identified by their association with water, their fight over the use of their remaining water has provided the financial resources they needed to help develop a new economic subsistence within the commercial realities of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Our final speaker will be Dustin Jensen, and after Dustin Jensen, we'll have James Toledo make comment on all presentations. Dustin.
It's all right. I'll just introduce myself while we're pulling up the slides. I mean, I don't know if there's any Navajos in there. You might be. We're all different colors. If you are here, Kitlachini Nishla, Bilagana Bashichin, Honagani Dasha Cheryl, Bilagana Dashanala, Kutegolden Nishla. We share our clans. That's what we do. We extend kinship out pretty far in Indian country, so everyone's related to you somehow, which makes it really hard to find a wife sometimes. Made it really hard in high school to get a prom date, you know. So your whole school is related somehow. Had to go north 85 miles to go to prom. So I was asked to speak on the Westwater community and the Westwater project that's taken place. It's a pretty wonderful little thing going on there. Do I just use the arrows? Okay. So Westwater is located just directly west of Blanding. So I'm gonna walk over here and I'm gonna point at Westwater and then I'm gonna point at Blanding, all right? Westwater, Gulch, Blanding. Okay. If you have a big and good enough arm, you can throw a rock and hit it. But in about 2019, Larry Echohawk was asked to serve as a special consultant in Indian affairs and law for the Attorney General's office and the governor's office. And in accepting that, he decided to go out and visit all 8 federally recognized tribes that exist in Utah. And when on his way down, from our way back from visiting the Navajo Nation and stopping at White Mesa community, which is a community of the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, who's actually headquartered in just south of Cortez in Toyac, Colorado. But they have a community just on this side of the Utah border. He was driving up, stopped in Blanding, and saw Westwater. And to his astonishment, he found out that they had no running water or electricity. And so you can imagine the feelings he's having standing behind the edge of the Cedars Museum and Cultural Center and seeing Westwater there with no water and electricity, and imagining if he had lived there in Westwater, how frustrating that should be, that your neighbors of 100 yards away have water and electricity and you do not. Okay, so it became a big thing. And when he reported back to Governor Herbert, they asked him, what do we need to do? What are your biggest priorities right now? And he was like, there's a few. He goes, but one that's just, I can't get off my mind is the Westwater community. And he explained to him the situation. And so he dug in and asked Governor Herbert to make it a top priority. So there's always been people living in what we call the Westwater community forever. Just so you know, it's not on the Navajo Nation. It's not on the Navajo reservation. It's in fee land. And but they've just been these Navajo people have been living here for generations. The Navajo Nation could not extend water and electricity up that way through their utility service because it was just too far away on that. There had been a number of promises to bring water in and electricity in, but that little gulch there, the green part, did more than just separate two communities, right? It was a representation of the feelings between the people of Westwater and the people of Blanding, which is very thick and real. If you go down there right now, go down there today, see how people feel about each other down there. It's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. But what Navajo Nation did is like, we can't get you electricity. So the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority came in with solar panels and wired the houses. You can kind of see at the top of the solar panel right here. And they had it wired into the house. Still, they had no running water, so they were provided these water tanks, and they'd have to drive to the well and pay for the water that they're bringing in. It's pretty expensive if you count gas, if you count a flatbed, if you count a pickup or just a vehicle to be able to do it. And so it got really rough. After Governor Herbert's admin came to an end, Governor Cox and Lieutenant Governor Henderson stepped in, and Lieutenant Governor we went down for something totally different. We went down to visit Bears Ears. It's right behind Westwater. It's Westwater's backyard is the whole Bears Ears area, and they had been aware of the Westwater project and the efforts to get water and electricity there. And so Secretary Deborah Holland came down to speak about Bears Ears at the edge of the Cedars Museum. And so I wandered over to Lieutenant Governor and Governor said, hey, remember we talked to you about Westwater? They're like, yeah, would you like to see it? And they're like, yeah, do we have time to go out there? I said, just turn around. It's right there. They're like, and they were just flabbergasted that a community this close would not have those utilities. And so they ended up calling meetings between the Blanding City Council, the San Juan County commissioners, and they brought in water engineers, they brought in the Navajo Nation, they brought in the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, and they had meetings there using Edge of the Cedars meetings rooms to see what could be done and make things happen. President Nez for the Navajo Nation and Lieutenant Governor Henderson, they drove over to Westwater, and Westwater just straight up said, yeah, you just want to get elected again. nothing's going to happen. People have been promising us water since 1941. You know, nothing's going to happen. No electricity is going to get here. And we kept hearing these things, right? And so Lieutenant Governor Henderson, she's a go-getter. You know, she ran into a couple. Well, a lady who lived with her parents, and they had both got COVID, and they were both all three were in the hospital, and their respiratory system was affected pretty badly, and they were only allowed to leave if they promised to use these little oxygen machines that they gave them. So they promised and they went home, but the generators that were pulling in electricity from the solar panels weren't strong enough to run even one of those oxygen machines. And so they ended up staying in a hotel because they didn't want to be in the hospital anymore. And that just really hit Governor Henderson hard, and Lieutenant Governor Henderson hard, and said, we got to fix something. Let's make it work. And again, there was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of pushback from the city because we have so much water. Water, it's not just an Indian problem. It's a rural Utah. It's an urban Utah problem. And so they're really nervous about providing that utility. And so we had to figure out a way to get everyone on board to be willing to participate in the project. I have a picture of Dieter Uchtdorf, who's in the first presidency of the LDS Church, because the LDS Church also got in on this. And that was one of the first things that they did, is they thought, well, let's get moving on this. Larry Echo Hawks and Emeritus 70 from the LDS Church and said, we need to do something. So the LDS Church put forward $500,000. And because they did that, the state of Utah put forward $500,000. And then people said, okay, there's things happening. Let's see what we can do and make it work even more. What all this negotiation did, and a ton of visits to Blanding City council meetings, and putting out fires and making argument about why this is necessary. These entities came together to form a memorandum of understanding. Oh, that's funny. My G got chopped off. Understanding. So the Navajo Nation, Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, State of Utah, San Juan County, and Blanding City all said, okay, we're all going to do something to make this work. And most of that something was in dollars, right? Oh, you can't even see that. And I can't see it either because I took my glasses off. So Navajo Nation ended up providing $3 million, and then found another $2.5 million they could use through ARPA funding. The state of Utah ended up putting up $3.5 million. The state of Utah also up front put up $497,000 to San Juan County and $381,000 to Blanding City, so that they could get this architectural designs on just to figure out how this would even work. Right, I had no idea that things cost that much. And then the church the LDS Church put in $500,000. So far, what's happened is that to date, back in September, they had a lighting up Navajo Nation ceremony, and we were able to look across. We're on USU's Blanding campus, and the west side of their campus, they have a little paved area with a little amphitheater type stage, and behind us we could see Westwater. Lieutenant Governor was there a couple of weeks before, and when the lights were actually turned on. And she didn't know they had turned on, but she was traveling with a group of people and some legislators and wanting them to see the community and back it if things need to go through the state legislature again. And she pulled up, and the sun was started towards sunset, and lights started coming on. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, lights are coming on!" She goes, "I didn't even plan this, right? It's just happening." And you know, it really sparked her to say, hey, we need to keep pushing forward with water also. And it's a promise made. It's been a promise made for 80 years now, right? And I think it's finally fulfilling. They're hoping that they can dig a well. Blanding City, their part in this was allowing us to dig a well in Blanding city limits. They get a new well if they allow us to run a pipe from Blanding to Westwater. They will sell the water and electricity to Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, who will then collect payment again from the residents of Westwater. State of Utah is so far just committed to keep moving forward until this project's done, and they're hoping by next December, if things go right. The problem is Westwater are sitting on a block of rock, so that's going to be kind of difficult. But this is something different that needed to be seen. I always quote this lady. Can call her to this lady. She was President Wilma Mankiller, first female president of the Cherokee Nation. After she finished her term of service, she went into public speaking and advocacy for Native American rights. And she would say this, she'd say, public perception creates public policy, saying how you see people pretty much determines how you treat people. Sometimes in my classes at UVU, people ask me, does racism exist? Is this person racist, that person racist? And I was like, I can't speak to any individual. But if you really want to know how people feel about you, look at the laws that affect you. Look at the institutions and how they serve you or how they don't. My biggest hope of all this in the Westwater project is that running those power lines from Blanding to Westwater and the water line from Blanding to Westwater not just connects them with utility, but it connects them as human beings. I hope this bridges some friendships. I hope this bridges some understanding. I hope they start to see each other in a better way, in a good way, so that they can also start treating each other better. I hope that with that, some of the legislation and resolutions that the city has passed that have probably worked to inhibit, utility from going there in the past are lifted. And that, this water and electricity, what we're seeing is life-saving, right? Not even solar panels could provide the life-saving needs of the residents there. We needed to run a line directly there. And hauling water, that works, but when we're telling people they have to wash their hands every day every time they do this because of COVID, it made it extremely difficult. So we know that how important running water would be to the life of everyone down there. And so that is the Westwater project. I believe that's my last slide. It is. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Dusty. Now we'll hear from James Toledo.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here. So Brad had asked me to, I guess, just share some comments about the presenters that presented today, and I guess to kind of sum everything up, I liked what Cheryl said, is that water is everywhere. Water is life. Water ensures that we're able to thrive, that we're able to survive, and living in a desert, that's far more critical. And, as I've been attending different breakouts, the topic of water is critically important. And I guess what comes to mind is our relationship. How do we relate to water? Is it just you turn on the tap and you're able to get the water for your bath or your shower or to cook or to drink, and not really thinking about our relationship to that? And then the example with Westwater, having a community where they've lived 80 years with the promise of getting basic utilities, access to water, access to electricity, and having promises made and not fulfilled. And that kind of ties in with the very high level oversight picture of what happened with the Ute Nation. Given promises, we're misled, we're not given the full respect that they deserved as a sovereign entity, as a sovereign nation, as a sovereign people who were here, who lived in balance and harmony prior to European settlement. And so the other piece that I guess stood out for me is just when it comes back down to humility or the ability to connect. Like I liked what Dustin said with quoting Wilma Mankiller, you know, that how you see people determines how you treat them. And so looking at the difference of how perhaps maybe the early Ute people were treated by the state and its leadership, and we fast forward to the current Cox-Henderson administration and the amount of time and effort that they dedicated to understanding the issue, took time from their busy schedules to travel down to that, you know, the southeastern part of the state, which is very remote if those who have traveled to that area, and made multiple trips to advocate, to understand, to meet with the people, to treat them as people, to you know, have that civil dialogue, to understand the needs of the community. And in the course of that, of course, you're going to encounter challenges as we all encounter challenges through our existence. But to see, you know, coming to the table with an open mind and a willingness to listen and to learn can really change an outcome of a problem that you're trying to solve, rather than fulfilling and giving empty promises, as many tribal nations across this country have experienced, to where, you know, with this example of Westwater, you know, perhaps that's a model that we could all learn, even as we are dealing with our relationship with water today. You know, our two largest reservoirs in this country are draining at very rapid rates. Our use of water is just, we expect it to be there. Greg Smoke mentioned earlier today in his remarks that there's a community in California that has no water. So again, I think it's time that we need to come together to look at our relationship with water. And I think connecting back with indigenous roots or indigenous ways of living with our relationship with water, if we're able to do that, perhaps we're able to solve some of these great challenges that are before us. And, you know, I really am glad that Cheryl opened the session with a prayer, with the relationship with water, the little cup of water each of us had. We blessed ourselves. We're able to have that connection. And I guess that would just kind of conclude my remarks and the comments that I was able to gather and capture from our three presenters. And so I guess, are there questions for any of our panelists?
There's mics on either side and one at the front for our speakers. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you taking the roll over.
Are there similar communities like Westwater that need basic utilities?
Absolutely. The Navajo Nation itself has about 60,000 homes without water or electricity. I'm not that old. I mean, I can pray. I'm old enough to pray. But I was in high school in '92, and that's when it was 91 is when I got running water, and that's because we moved. Navajos, at least for the Navajo Nation and a lot of other tribal communities, we didn't actually just live in communities, right? We didn't zone out. We didn't have streets and do things like that. We just lived where our families grew up. And what got really expensive was providing infrastructure to get water lines out to everyone, and then to get electric lines out to everyone, and telephone lines. it was a difficult process. And so what the Navajo Nation did is they built like 100 homes all in one spot and said, please move over here. And then we'll work on getting utility out to where you live. And when we do, you have the option of moving back. A lot of people stayed. Some people moved back, but it's all over Utah and in Native communities, especially when they're in rural areas anyway. Having reliable utility is another problem or issue.
Part of our reservation currently does run without water. So, and it's in Pogri. So it used to be, Utah used to be the main hub, thank you. Used to be the main hub for the Ute Indian tribe, which ran like, it's right situated right next to the Green River. But currently in its state where it's at, after all of the people moved into the urban areas, brought on with modern day, they decided to desert Ore. So I think we have a total of 8 homes down there without water. So we do face the same issues as well.
Sondra, could you explain a little bit more about the allotments and both the laws and how it affected this story you're telling? I have to say that I think your paper puts together the history of water for the Ute Reservation in a very succinct way, but there's so many moving parts. Could you expand on the allotment story?
Right. It definitely is very contracted in my 22-minute long instead of 20-minute long presentation here. I expand quite a bit in my book and explain how it worked and what happened and the ins and outs. But to understand the allotment, around, I believe it was 1880, you had the Allotment Act, a couple of different allotment acts that worked together were passed by Congress. Here was all of these areas of land that the Indians were using all over the country. In Colorado, some of the first reservations that were treated after 1846 down in Abiquiu, correct? Are you referring to that one? 1846 in Abiquiu? But they started making these treaties, and the first one gave a whole third of the state of Colorado to the Ute Indians, northern and southern. And then the governor didn't like that, and they began to run on a political stand of the Utes must go. Let's get rid of them out of the area. I mean, what do they need all that land for? They're not using that land. And so that leads into a whole lot of other things, but that was the attitude of here's all this land. The Uinta Reservation, and I think that included the Ure as well, was 4 million acres, okay? And they're going, there's all that land, and we have people who need to be farming, and they're not using it. Think of the 10 talent story in the Bible. The guy who didn't use his land lost, or didn't use his talent, loses the talent. And so that was the attitude that they had going in. So they passed this Allotment Act, which basically ties into the idea of homesteading that Dr. Smoke was talking about. The idea that this Jeffersonian ideal, agricultural ideal, that you can help civilize the Native Americans by giving them their own personal homesteads get them to learn how to be farmers, yeoman farmers. And consequently, they go through and they break, not only that, if we give them the homesteads, it's altruistic, they can all become these noble yeoman farmers that Jefferson and Powell envisioned, using the plows and so on. And then, oh gosh, we can open up all the rest of the land and we can then sell it as homesteads for everybody else as well. You have the Oklahoma Sooners, for example. We had a run on land, like one slide I had up there, in the Uinta Basin as soon as they allotted the land, and they did not give the best land to the Native Americans. The best land was saved for the homesteaders. And so consequently, that's what they did. 160 acres was considered a homestead at this time. 80 acres if you were not married and you were a single man, 160 acres if you were married and had a family. One of the things that will happen is that the manipulated treaty that the Pogri will end up signing that forces them literally at gunpoint into the Ute reservation. They're given homesteads. It's written into the agreement that they're forced to sign. So they have to take it when they are told they're going to take it. The Uinta and the White River will fight it, but ultimately in 1905, we are all given their homesteads, and a lot of them. But one of the things with the government is they began to reduce the amount of the homesteads to 80 acres instead of 160. But the bottom line, it was based on this whole concept of 160 acre homestead with that 1861 Homestead Act that was passed. And so that was the whole idea behind that is we want to open up these reservations. So let's just make everybody a farmer. Is that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Would love to take any other questions.
I lived in Chinle for a year and I was curious, we had groundwater in the teacher housing, but it was far from drinkable. So I was curious, like on the Ute reservation or in your knowledge of the Navajo reservation, those that have groundwater, how much of it is even potable? How much of it is drinkable for like, does that make sense? Like some of it, like for me, like our groundwater, I put blue bath salts in my daughter's bathtub because there was so much silt. So I didn't know if it was necessarily a geographical thing or lack of a quality of the system because it was on the reservation. I was curious what your opinion was on that.
Yeah, I think it was just probably where you were at. A lot of areas are just wonderful. I think I mean I love the well water we had growing up. I didn't mind hauling it at all, you know. But you will find areas where contamination of some sort is going to happen. I think if you go just a couple miles south of Blanding, you'll run that White Mesa community, who's just about 3 miles away from the White Mesa uranium mill, and they're not in compliance with the things that they need to do. We flew over that with the lieutenant governor. We saw the uranium ponds and they have these big square ponds, right? And there's supposed to be a foot of water over all uranium that's in those ponds, and only about, I'm going to be generous here, probably about 45% of each pond was covered in water. And then they offered to give us a tour, and I'm like, no, I'm going there, bro. It's blowing around. But you know, the Ute Mountain Ute reservation is very concerned about that. You know, that's sitting right right above their groundwater, and they're testing it, and they're finding that there are levels of toxicity in there, but I guess they're within range, you know, that where it's safe. And I heard a state official say once, well, you know, the water in Blanding is just as, you know, it's testing the same, so you should be okay. And I was like, I don't think the right argument is our water is just as toxic as yours, so you're all right. You know, that's probably not the argument you lead with on this. But there are places certainly where the water is probably a little more murky than others. But I think it just really depends on where you're at.
Well, I know for certain the Goshute tribe is where they did a lot of the testing, and it's in the soil. And so they are not able to drink their water. My grandma is a descendant from the Goshute reservation. So, you know, it just, again, on the Ute tribe, however, we have a lot of spring water, a lot of runoff. And so we're a little fortunate. But yeah, we usually.
All the water I drink whenever I was out there, it's pretty good.
Yeah. So we have refining with the dam and everything up there. So I'm not really.
The water's moving.
Yeah, I really don't even, I've never heard of anybody having problems on a reservation up there.
Other questions? I want to thank you all I want to thank Cheryl Lone Bear, Sandra G. Jones, Dustin Jensen, and James Toledo for being speakers in Native Utahns, the struggle to get and use water from the settlement era to the present. And thanks to all of you for coming to this session.